All right, this has to be one of the most insane stories I ever heard. It's like Law & Order, Black Mirror, and the guy from Saw got together and made a real-life tragedy. And it's not a happy story. It ends in a tragedy, as I just mentioned. But I think it's really important to talk about because what a lot of people don't realize is that it wasn't a one-off event. I found another story of this happening just 2 days prior, and fortunately, everybody walked away from that event unharmed. But as such, it's not getting as much coverage. And I think it's really important for everyone to be made aware of this, not just Uber drivers, because honestly, anyone with a phone and an address is susceptible to this scam. But before I cover how this wasn't just a one-off event and how Uber should be held accountable, even though nobody is talking about how they directly contributed to what happened here, here's the main story that's getting all the attention.
Lolitha Hall screamed for help as William Brock confronted her with a gun.
Yes, I know what you're...
But as the Uber driver tried to flee, police say the 81-year-old resident shot her multiple times. And then he called 911.
Well, I shot her in the leg first time, then I shot her in the shoulder.
Why did you do that?
Because I was threatened that she was going to come and kill me.
Sounds like a crazy, paranoid old guy, right? Well, check this out. All morning, William Brock was receiving phone calls from what he thought was a real person, saying that they had one of his relatives, and unless he gave them a bunch of money, they were going to kill the relative and him and everybody else around, and they expected him to give the money to the person that they were sending to his house.
The guy on the phone center here.
So the male on the phone was trying to get money from you, and she was knocking on the door at the same time?
Yes, and he was telling me he was going to kill me and the family and everybody else around.
And sadly enough, that person was Lolitha Hall, a woman who was just working Uber. You see, at the same time that these calls were being made, the scammer ordered an Uber and instructed the Uber, who happened to be Lolitha Hall, to go to this house to pick up a package. William Brock, thinking she was connected to the guy on the phone who had just threatened to kill him and his family, reacted in this way. Two innocent people acting on false information provided by one bad actor. Tell me that is not some of the most diabolical stuff you have ever heard in your entire life. I mean, at the end of the day, the average scammer is the scum of the scum. But at least you can be like, okay, they're trying to take money from this person because people want money. You can use money. You don't need to explain why people want money, right? But when you're creating this kind of scam, this kind of chaos just for the sake of chaos, that is pure evil. There's no end game for this scammer other than to enjoy the suffering of other people. Now, before I show you how this wasn't a one-off event and why Uber should be held accountable, at least in some part, for what happened here, I want to talk about something that a recent video of mine covered that a lot of you guys found interesting, and that's the Castle Doctrine. For those of you who have seen this video, an Uber driver fought off two carjackers by pulling out his weapon that he was legally allowed to carry. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, no, I'm kidding, it's definitely fortunate when nobody gets hurt. He didn't fire a weapon, but if he had, his lawyer explained that the Castle Doctrine, the right to defend yourself in your own home or your own property, would not have applied.
In this case, because these two individuals were invited into the car, they're not breaking in. And so as a result, Castle Doctrine wouldn't apply.
I thought the nuance of the Castle Doctrine was very interesting and had it in mind as the lawyer here was talking about William Brock, who's facing 15 to life charged with felony murder.
What does the prosecution need to prove in this case?
That Brock knew he was using deadly force. And what the prosecution is going to say is there is just no reason to shoot 3 times when somebody is trying to leave your property. If somebody is trying to flee, almost by definition, they are no longer posing a threat.
Now, Ohio, where this took place, actually has extremely confusing laws as it applies to this particular situation. I mean, I'm sure any state does because this is the most messed up situation you could possibly imagine. I'm going to go over these laws real quick. I know it's not the most visually entertaining stuff, but I'm telling you, this is a Law and Order episode in real life. This is, I'm flabbergasted. Before the change, Ohio law included a duty to retreat clause, meaning that to claim self-defense, someone had to show that they either tried to leave the situation or voiced an intention to leave. Ohio's Castle Doctrine, passed in 2008, removed that duty to retreat for people in a lawfully occupied residence or in their vehicle. Now, being that William Brock was outside of his home but on his property, I don't know how that applies. I'm not a lawyer. However, under the new law, there is no longer a duty to retreat as long as somebody is in a place where they are legally allowed to be, which obviously it was Mr. Brock's residence, so he's legally allowed to be there, whether he's inside the house or not. In cases where there is evidence to suggest that a person used force in self-defense, the burden is on prosecutors to prove otherwise. The new law does not otherwise change the circumstances in which deadly force can be used. The person who is attacked may use deadly force only if he reasonably and honestly believed that deadly force was necessary to prevent serious bodily harm or death. If the person does not have this belief, he should not use deadly force. Again, if it does not put your life or the life of others in danger, you should withdraw from the confrontation if it is safe for you to do so. William Brock obviously did not need to shoot Lolitha Hall, but he honestly believed that Lolitha Hall was either the person or working with the person that was threatening death to him and his family. And it could very well be argued that he believed that if he let her go, his life and the life of his family members were in danger. Just listen to how confused and rattled this poor old guy sounded when the cops showed up.
I'm sure glad to see you guys out here because I've been on this phone for a couple hours with this guy trying to save me. Had a nephew in jail and had a wreck in Charleston and just kept hanging on and needing bond money, and what this woman was supposed to. Yeah.
Now, I'm speculating here, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that when the cop said that it's probably a scam, he's seen this a lot and he knows that it was an empty threat that targets elderly people that might not know better. But I wouldn't at all be surprised if when William Brock agrees saying that, yeah, I figured it was a scam, he's meaning that it was a scam to extort him for money. Otherwise, why would he stay on the phone with this person for a couple of hours if he knew it wasn't for real? And I just want to interject this in here. I think it's really easy to think, oh, I would never fall for a scam like that. They target older people, and older people fall for it because they don't know better. But I don't think a lot of people understand how sophisticated some of these scams are getting now. This isn't one of those instances, but I've heard stories, crazy stories, about how people are starting to use AI voices to simulate relatives and make it sound real. Think about it. You're sitting there and you randomly get a call from somebody that you really care about, and it actually sounds like them, and they're freaking out. You're not going to be thinking clearly. I know the trendy, cool thing people say to protect yourself from things like this is come up with a password.
The smart way to play this is to come up with a password and let all of your family know what that password is. And if someone calls and they're asking for something like this and they don't know what your given password is, move on.
That's a great idea, Jay.
Yeah.
I think that's a little ridiculous, and I'm going to tell you why. There's only 2 steps that you really need to protect yourself from falling for something like that. First is your mindset. You have to understand you are not that important. If a kidnapper was going to extort somebody for money, they would target somebody with a lot of money. 99% of people that are running around making passwords with their families are not high net worth individuals. I mean, let's take me, for example, okay? There's literally thousands of hours of my voice on the internet, and it'd be very easy for somebody to take my voice, put it into an AI voice generator, and then come up with some sort of script where I call somebody and say, oh, they took me, I need help. And don't get me wrong, I love my life, but if somebody wanted to rob from me, what are they going to get? A half of a Bitcoin and a 2012 Honda Civic? Like, come on, people. And the second step, instead of being all crazy and ridiculous and having this password and just living this life out of fear that you need to be prepared to get kidnapped at all times, If you're ever in a situation like this, you got to think the person who's trying to extort you actually wants your money, so they're going to work with you. It's going to be a win-win situation. So if they're actually for real, they'll prove to you that they're for real, and all you got to do is ask questions that the person they have would know. Honestly, that's probably stupid advice. All you got to do is say, okay, let me just call you back. Give me a number where I can reach you. But it should never even get to that point, because your first thought should be, this is not real. All right, back to the scam in question and the Castle Doctrine. I also found it interesting how it says if you escalate a confrontation by throwing the first punch, attacking, or drawing your handgun, you are the aggressor. Obviously, William Brock was the one that drew the handgun, but he's on his own property, and again, I think it could be argued that he wasn't the one that escalated the confrontation. The escalation happened when the death threats were made over the phone. I'm telling you, this is like some Law and Order plot twist. I can't believe this is real life. And what's even crazier is this isn't a one-off event. This is a replicable scam that people need to be made aware of. Shout out to KYC Channel 3 in Cleveland, Ohio. Of all the coverage I've seen on this story, this is the only station that decided to do their job as journalists, and instead of just resharing the same shocking story for the clicks and the eyeballs, they asked the very important question, is this a one-off event, or is this something that's happening elsewhere and people need to be made aware of it? And I'll be honest, what they found shocked me.
David Young has been a Lyft driver for the past 6.5 years. He says 2 days before that incident, he received messages from a passenger asking him to stop on the way to pick up documents. When he arrived at a home in Delaware, Ohio, dashcam video shows what happened next.
How you doing?
Good. Come on out. Right now.
All right.
Come on out. Get out of here.
What?
Get out. Come on out.
The man claimed Young was there to pick up $5,000 to get his grandson out of jail in Cleveland. That's according to a phone call he received. The man believed Young was part of it, but it turns out it was part of the same scam. Eventually, police showed up, helping to clear up that miscommunication. He says he hopes his story serves as a warning. Now, as for the original case that turned deadly, Uber says the account of the person who ordered the Uber trip has been banned, but that just doesn't seem like enough. I mean, this is really scary, and both incidents in Ohio, too.
Listen, Miss Anchor Lady, I don't know who you are, but you just found yourself a new fan. Anybody who's been following Uber for a while knows that the Uber playbook is whenever anything bad happens that they do have some responsibility for, instead of claiming any of that responsibility or saying how they're going to change, what they do is they say,
the account of the person who ordered the Uber trip has been banned, but that just doesn't seem like enough.
As pathetic as it is, I really think this is the first time I ever heard an anchor call out how empty it is when Uber says the account holder has been banned. Well, whoop-de-freaking-do, because part of the reason why Uber is responsible is the same reason why banning the account holder means absolutely nothing. The barrier to entry as a rider or a user of the Uber app is basically zero. When the account holder gets banned, they can just make a new account. And instead of taking some very simple steps that would force its users to provide some sort of verification of who they are, Uber gives out nonsense statements like this after tragedies have occurred.
There is no other way to describe this incident than a horrific tragedy. Our hearts continue to be with Lolitha's loved ones as they grieve her sudden loss. We have been in contact with law enforcement and remain committed to supporting their investigation.
Now, let's be clear. At face value, there's nothing wrong with this statement. The problem is when Uber says this literally thousands of times, you start to wonder about the sincerity of it. Call me crazy, but wouldn't it be better if instead of constantly committing yourself to helping law enforcement with their investigation, you just took the steps necessary to prevent these investigations from happening in the first place? Oh, I'm sorry. What a silly me. That would hurt your bottom dollar. God forbid you put Uber drivers' lives ahead of customer acquisition. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, very simple barriers of entry of using the Uber app, like asking people to provide state-issued documentation or adding some sort of two-factor authentication when you're getting deliveries that's not at your permanent residence, or simply notifying the user that they logged the location of the phone when they ordered the Uber, no matter where the delivery is going to. And I know there's ways around all these things, and people will always find a way way to cheat the system. But the more barriers you have, the more layers of security to prevent these things from happening, the less likely people are to engage in that behavior. Put it like this. It's harder to use somebody else's Netflix account or to order off of somebody else's Amazon Prime than it is to scam an Uber driver. I guess because we're just gig workers out here trying to earn an honest buck, we don't deserve as much protection as a movie on a streaming platform or one-day shipping from an online store. Now, I'm not holding my breath for Uber to start caring about driver or rider safety, so I'm going to put together a video on how to protect yourself as a driver and a rider from sticky Uber situations. In the meantime, YouTube thinks you'll like this video here. Thanks for watching.